Test, test, test. Can you guys hear me? Is there someone out there except for Big Back? I've seen your comment already. Let me know if you can hear and see us. That would be really helpful. And I'll try to make sure that. Yeah, this looks good. I assume you can hear us. We'll see. We'll test this with these bottles and see what happens. Well, cheers, everyone, and in particular, cheers to you, my very, very special guest today, Nicola Griffith, author of a lot of books, including Hild and Menewood and Spear, which I guess are the ones we'll mostly talk about today. We'll see where things go. Welcome, and thank you very much for actually doing this and going to a new place, in this case, BookTube, which is apparently a thing. But people talk about books on YouTube. So thank you very much for coming today.
It is my pleasure to be here. It's the very first time I've done any kind of YouTube live thing. So I have my beer too, and I'm gonna just have a good time and see what happens. I want to have questions from people and just chat and relax. Basically, it's Sunday. All I've got to do is drink beer and talk. So I'm relaxed. I'm happy.
That does sound like a perfect time on a Sunday. And yeah, I see there's already a lot of people showing up. Liam, great to see you. Biggest, great to see you. Britain and Matt. Yeah, we already figured out that my mic is muffled for some reason, and I have no idea what's going on there. Let me see if I can turn it up, if that does actually change something. We'll see. Otherwise, I'll just have to yell. And Ori, thanks for making it over here from the other talk. I think Ori is the one who actually first tagged you in the author video I did back in the day. So he's the one to be blamed for that. So yeah, I think we'll start with like just average conversation and talk a bit about Hild and Menewood and go into that, and then we'll just go from there. So my first question is, now Hild being a very specific character and a very specific time. So how did you come across Saint Hilda or Hild for the first time? Because I've read Bede at some point at university, but like, how did you come across that?
I had not read Bede. I came across Hild because I came across the remains of her abbey in my early 20s. I was having a really crap time, and so I decided to get away for a few days, and I hiked up the coast. And I'd read Dracula and I'd read Possession, so I knew about the abbey and I knew about the 199 steps. And so I climbed them with my backpack on, and it was a bit of work. But I really hadn't expected how amazing that place was. It was. I'm not really a believer in woo shit. I'm a science-based life form. But if ever there is a place on Earth where the skin of the Earth is thin and the other world is close by, it would be that place. It's amazing. It's on the edge of a cliff. It looks out over the sea, and there's just something about the combination of the light and the smell and the sound of the sea that it kind of turned me inside out like a sock. It made me look at the world differently. I looked around at the ruins of that abbey, and it's not the ruins of the abbey Hild built. It was one that was built many centuries later. But it was there because she had built hers there. So then I started to think, wow, who made this place? What kind of person did that? So I went off to the little tourist booth, and I got my pamphlet. And it said it was founded by this woman called Hild of Whitby. And didn't have much information on her. So I thought, oh, okay, great. I'm going to go read a book about Hild of Whitby. There were no books about Hild of Whitby. So I then started searching everywhere, and basically it all came down to variations on one theme, which was the information in the story, H.E. Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English Church.
And he doesn't really talk about her life. I've read
No,
it.
it's mostly miracles that he talks about, but he does say a couple of interesting things, like kings and princes used to come to her for advice and they would take it. And so then I start thinking, okay, hang on, this is like the early 7th century, what we grew up thinking of as the Dark Ages, when might was right and women were meant to be just nothing but chattel, if you believe the way history has always been written. So I thought, well, how come a woman in this age where the sword was everything got to tell kings and princes what to do? And how come she trained 5 bishops? Because hang on, I didn't think women even were supposed to be able to read then, etc. So I started thinking, well, history is just wrong. So then I had to go and research everything I could think of about the 6th and 7th century. I started off with the 7th, but there just wasn't that much, honestly.
Yeah.
And what we do have is based on Bede, which I'd already read, and his stuff was largely based on Gildas.
Yeah.
He's like at least half. I mean, it's polemic rather than history. So I just had to then start. Then I went to archaeology and started looking at material culture, like what things did they have? And then I would think, well, how did they make those things? And that just started informing my understanding of their culture. And so I went on, and by this time it was more and more obvious that this woman, Hild, if history was right, could not have existed and done the things she was supposed to have done. So then I decided, okay, I'm going to build the 7th century, and I'm going to put this young girl inside it, and I'm going to grow her in like a little terrarium, a little experiment. Just grow this woman inside here and see what she could and couldn't do. And so I've been running this giant controlled experiment now for more than 10 years. And it's fascinating. I'm learning so much.
Yeah, I think one exact the image of the 7th century, 6th century that we have is obviously not exactly the best because the sources, especially for Britain, are incredibly thin with like angry Gildas and triumphant Bede who knows when Easter's supposed to happen, and there's not much in between. And that image of women being chattel, I think, like the more we learn about it, the more you look into like archaeological evidence stuff like that. That's probably a narrative that someone made up very much later because of political reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to see you actually go there and do that. And I find it super interesting because I've read a bunch of historical fiction. I've read a bunch of Arthurian retellings and stuff like that. It's like this one feels way more authentic and more realistic, even though it's not constantly showing where the sources are. Like this feels much more realistic from what I've learned from at university, talking to people who study ancient history or early Middle Ages or late antiquity. This feels more realistic because it just makes more sense, and that's sort of a common sense. I hate the term because it's usually used by people I don't disagree with. But that point I think is really interesting with Hild. It feels real in a way that I found fascinating there.
Well, yeah. To me, my favorite kind of books are the books that I can fall into, that they're so well written that you want to be there, but also that you would know how things work. Like, how do people earn their money? Where do they get their clothes? What do they drink? What do they eat? What do they wear? Where do those things come from? I mean, you read all kinds of fantasy books where some weary travelers stop by this fantastic inn in the middle of nowhere that always has great food and fab beer. The beer's never gone off. And it's like, how did the supply chain work? Where are the roads? Who's raising these cattle? And where are the gardens for these carrots and onions? So to me, I want to know that stuff. So I have to make I have to know all that stuff before I can even begin.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, luckily, there's a lot of like archaeological stuff happening over the last couple of decades where you get like more ideas of like what is possible, what is not, but it's still turn that because archaeologists are not necessarily interested in like how an actual society works at that point. They're like sorting stuff they can identify and then they take all the rest and call it probably for ritualistic purposes and move on. I found that
So
really interesting your
yeah,
approach there.
I have a story about when I was first researching Hild before I even wrote a word of the book.
Yeah.
I found this group of medieval academics who were starting blogs. And so I would drop in and leave comments, and nobody would talk to me because I wasn't an academic. They would just, this comment would just stay there like
Yeah.
stank, and they'd all walk around it, and I'd be like, But then one day, one of them they were talking about Yevering, which was the big ritual complex, princely ritual complex in Northumbria, and about this certain structure, and they didn't know what it was. And I'm like, well, it's perfectly obvious what it was. And they're like, well, no, it's not, which is why we don't know. And I'm like, okay, when you get large groups of people coming together today, what's the first thing you need? A car park, right?
Yeah.
This is a pony park. Or it's where you corral all the food that you're gonna slaughter for the feast. It's like it's clear. It's like this is a lifestyle. It's a pony park.
Yeah.
And they was just like, And then I got invited to join a blog meme game, and that's why I didn't have a blog at the time. I just had a website. But so I built a research blog just so I could
Yeah.
play this game, and that's how I started actually making friends with medievalists and getting to talk to them, and it was really cool, and it all came from the pony park.
How long did you know that you wanted to write a book about Hild before you actually started writing it?
Oh, okay. Well, really, I really didn't want to write a book about Hild because I wanted to go back to that time. Once I got interested in it, I wanted to go back to that time. And I wanted to time travel. I wanted to go to the place where I grew up, because I grew up in Yorkshire, basically Hild's territory. And I wanted to see what it was like with no contrails and no tarmac on the roads and no constant noise of traffic. Where the trees were different, the birds were different, all that stuff. And of course, I thought, oh, I could mention Hild because the whole idea came from Whitley Abbey. But I didn't want to write about her because, I'd read Bede and he said these interesting things, but every other woman he talks about them because they're a queen and or a virgin, and it's like these were the women who were admired, and I don't find that kind of woman interesting. I just don't. So I didn't want to write the book, but then it drove me more and more crazy, this idea of how was this possible, this woman possible? In the end, I thought, well, I have to write about her. So that's when I started to pull all my research together seriously. So I was seriously researching early medieval stuff from about the late 90s, but I didn't start to really focus in on Hild herself, I would say, until about 2005. And then I did more research and then I wrote the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a question there from Paramita about what kind of historical fiction works you find inspirational. Goes back to the quote that compares Hild to
Okay.
Wolf Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess the question is like, are you actually reading a lot of historical fiction or not?
Yes and no. I think the books that really triggered both Spear and Hild in Menewood
Mhm.
was reading people like Rosemary Sutcliffe and Henry Treece and Mary Stuart and Mary Renault. She was very, obviously more concerned with
Mhm.
Greek stuff, but I loved the way they combined politics and physical action with the outdoors, with nature. There were always descriptions of nature.
Mhm.
I just hated the way they treated women, you know.
Yeah, I think like the descriptions of nature are really, really important thing there. I love them in both Spear and Hild and Menewood. It's sort of one of those things that like are very specific to a certain kind of British author. I feel like all the way to you already mentioned Sutcliffe and Stifel. It obviously shows in Tolkien as well, right?
Oh yes, yes, Tolkien, obviously, yes.
It was like I was always wondering like why that is compared to a lot of American authors, like even German authors. Like why are British authors so concerned with forests and nature? Is it because there's so little left on the island, or is there something? Because there's always like a level of nostalgia in those nature descriptions. Is that
Yeah,
maybe it, or is there something else?
I think it's a real mix of things. I mean, there's this whole connection of nature, particularly the woods, the forest, with folklore. I mean, this is where
Mm,
all the mystery comes from. It's where all the elves live and the
yeah,
fairies, and this is where magic happens. You know, once you're on a path in a forest, something interesting is going to happen. And in this country, I think forests are a big forest is it's different. Most of them are evergreens, so they're conifers.
yeah,
They are quite different. They are not. You can't imagine sinking into a lovely dell by a little burbling stream. No, there's a raging torrent tearing through there, and there might be bears. It's really different.
yeah. When was the last bear killed in England? I think it's around Roman times. So
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I remember reading it somewhere because it sort of like when they officially killed the last bear, and then after that, and it was like very much around like under Roman occupation still.
Mm.
So yeah, yeah, it's interesting because there is that like nostalgic yearning towards the forest. And super interesting compared to forests in German folklore and German books. When I read those, which rarely happens, it's like forests are pretty dark and brutal. You don't go there.
Hmm.
There's no real magic in there except for like witches killing children or whatnot. It's like there are dangerous places, and
Yeah. Yeah.
that nostalgia, the whole Robin Hood magic kind of thing. Forests are like a very different thing in British fiction. I find it interesting that you capture that as well with Hild and Nemo.
Yeah, it's where alternative people hang out, whether, as you say, it's Robin Hood,
Yeah,
or you're a dryad,
yeah,
or you're a hippie, you know,
mhm,
growing your weed under the cover of
yeah,
trees. It's not your normal upright citizens.
yeah. I think that might be part of it because the forest in that situation, especially with England, with the way property works in England, right? It's like the forest is sort of the one place where you can sort of be free up to a point compared to villages or towns and cities at the point. Like, the
Yeah.
forest is sort of this point of escape in a way.
But it's not just that, it's also the actual physiological
Mm,
joy that you get
yeah,
from being under the trees. I mean, it
yeah,
changes your mood. I mean, it really, there's so much data now about what forests do for you and how necessary
yeah.
they are to people. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, so here's a question that I find really interesting. You obviously written Spear. I want to go back to that in a moment, but you've written Spear and you've written Hild and you've done a lot of research about like the 6th and 7th century Britain, and there's a lot of literature around that. There's obviously all the Arthurian stuff, some of that trying to be more historically accurate for whatever measure of historical accuracy you can have with an Arthurian tale, and straight up historical novels. What I find interesting, the more I think about it, is how much those historical novels set in that specific time resemble post-apocalyptic novels from like the 20th century. This idea of having the fallen empire and people having these different communities with different beliefs and ideals, all struggling for dominance or rebuilding the empire. With Arthur, how it's often cast as someone who tries to bring back the glory of Rome. And I was just wondering if there's a connection there, because obviously that image of fallen Rome and so forth is heavily reliant on Gibbon and on the decline of the Roman Empire. And I was just wondering if there's what your thoughts are on that specific idea, how those mirror the fear of like a fallen British Empire, obviously in the 20th century, or a fall of a hypothetical or whatever you call it, American empire in the future, because the way people imagine the time after an empire seems to be very much like early medieval Britain for some reason.
Well, yeah. I mean, there were so many falls.
Yeah.
There was these are broad sweeping statements I'm going to make now. They're not necessarily true. They're just received history. Okay, so there's the fall of the original Celtic tribes to the Romans. Then there's the fall of Rome. Then there's the fall of the Romano-British Celtic princes who become early kings to the incoming Germanic tribes. And then you have the fall of the so-called Anglo-Saxons to the Normans. And then it just goes on and on and on. It's like endless falls. And there was always a nostalgic look back. There was always this, let's pick a hero from that fallen time. I mean, there's no Charlemagne legend because Charlemagne won. Arthur is a legend because he lost, because that's just that's the national psyche, I think. But you could see it really early on in Old English poetry. The poems about the ruins and the work of giants and we will never reach those heights again kind of thing. It's but I'm thinking about Arthurian legend now. That is really very much tied into colonialism and justifications of same. I mean, the Normans loved Arthur because it was all about, the why the Anglo-Saxons were bad, because Anglo-Saxons killed Arthur. So let's make Arthur our friend, and we can assume this. We really do belong here, mental.
Which ties back with Geoffrey of Monmouth writing for Normans at the time. That's an interesting point that also raised there, that he believes that part of the lack, very that romantic view at nature, that harmonious view of nature in America might be because of the fact that most American writers don't have that connection to the American land in the way that he, as a Native American, does have. Like his culture does have that connection, and things that might be part of that. Why that is more rare with American writers in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed when I first came to this country, I found that what a lot of Americans would call amazing, beautiful country, I just thought, oh my God, that looks so inimical to me. I could not survive there. These are the Grand Canyon, the desert. I'm like, this is not beauty to me. This is just like, I will die there. No. I mean, and the beautiful thing about an English forest is that, you can pick berries. club a couple of bunnies over the head. You could pick mushrooms.
Yeah.
You can live there, but you can't live in American beauty the way that many, again, sweeping statements for the sake of argument and also because beer. So I wouldn't necessarily argue these points, but I think they're interesting to consider.
Yeah, I think he might have a point there because there is a lot of like part of the American myth, right? The whole like manifest destinies. So much of that is like going and like taking the land and making the land your own, like owning it. There's a certain
Yeah.
enmity. There's an antagonistic streak in so much of that part of American the American psyche. I think.
Mhm.
But we see that when we look at like the Southwest and the problems with water in the Colorado and so forth. Like, you went and decided to make the land what you want the land to be, and kind of forgot that the land might have something to say from that regard as well.
See. Oh, I'm seeing a question here. Ms. Griffith, one common thread for me as a female reader from Ammonite to Hild, women are people, they just are. Is this conscious construct or something organic? Yes. It has become conscious. It was always very clear to me that women are people. I wrote Ammonite to actually answer this question that I saw a couple of times in academic discourse about science fiction, about are most representations of women really aliens? Why are so many aliens represented as kind of vaguely female? I mean, just look at Alien, right? The movie. I mean,
Yeah.
And it's because the overall perception at the time seemed to be that, are women human? We're not entirely sure. They're like girl humans. They're not human humans. And so I wrote Ammonite to very consciously tackle that, where women were everything. They were the heroes, the villains, the boring people. They were the rulers, the serfs, the farmers, the traders, the kids, the grannies. They were everything. And so, of course, they were people. And that just, the rest, I don't think about it consciously now when I write because it's just so ingrained. So yeah, the answer is yes. Yes, it was organic, and B, it was conscious, and now it just is. I hope I answered your question.
Now, the part about that being conscious, I think that's something I wanted to kind of point to with the more like queer elements of your fiction. And that too is like very natural with, especially with Hild and Menewood, how there are, the queer romance. Like it took me like half a book to realize that what's his name, the Deacon James is actually has a relationship with the blacksmith. Oh wait, that's right.
Yep.
I love that. I love that because it is just normal. It just happens because people are people in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
The normalizing aspect, I think, is something that I very much appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, in Hild and Menewood, queer people, they're just queer. They don't have to be queer people. They just they have sex as and when it seems like a good idea. I wish we could all be quite so free sometimes.
Yeah. It's something I found really interesting. Like years ago, I read Robert Moore's The Invention of Persecuting Society, and he quotes like other documents, like how like homophobia and the persecution of homosexuals in general is sort of an invention of the 11th or 12th century, up to a point where it's like, yeah, before that, probably it was just normal and no one thought too much about it. So it's sort of like a thing we consciously kind of started doing and still needs to undo in a lot of ways. And I think just going back to that normalization might be a good way to do that.
People just spend too much time trying to divide us into us and them, and they can find finer and finer and finer gradations to do that. And then when they hook it to some political purpose, that's when it gets really nasty, and it takes a long time. But we've been seeing that happen for 30 years or so again, as we did in the 20th century. I don't really want to go there too much with the politics because it makes me cross.
But that's one part though that I wanted to ask about that. Do you see you writing about queer things, or when you wrote So Lucky? Do you see your writing as a form of activism in a way, like actually?
Yeah. No, I mean, one of the reasons I write for two. Okay, I write for several reasons. One of them is to find out. I mean, I often end up writing a book to answer a question that's driving me crazy. So I write to find out, and I write to write things that I would enjoy reading because I can't find the thing I want. So I write it. But I also really, frankly, write to change the world. I want to change the world one reader at a time. And I do that very deliberately. It's happens to be a lovely byproduct of I think writing a really good book. And for me, if I write a book where a non-disabled, straight, white, cis Protestant man ends up thinking and feeling and understanding and really living inside a queer woman, then by the time they close the book, they will have changed slightly. They will have understood how it is to just not be themselves, just for a little while. And that can have all kinds of knock-on effects.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the strengths that fiction gives us, that we can actually do that, right? We can live in someone else's headspace for a while, and hopefully we'll take something out of that and become a different person, a better person, ideally, after doing that and seeing how it could be to be, someone else's shoes or head or whatever you want to, to embody that in a way. I know Quick Jen has asked about whether you have found some connection to the nature in the Pacific Northwest where you live now compared to, England.
Not as much as I would like. I mean, there are a couple of large parks here in Seattle that I really like. One in particular, Carkeek Park. Everybody's frozen. Can you see me okay? Can someone drop a comment? Here everything is frozen.
I can still hear you.
You can still hear me? Okay.
I can very much still hear you.
Great. So yeah, there are some things I love, but they are very they are closer to the UK. So there are places in the mountains of North Carolina, the ancient places, the Appalachians, where those woods have been growing for 100 million years. They haven't been clear cut. They smell old. They feel, and they are survivable. They are gentle places in a particular. Obviously, you could still die there, but you could survive there. And then there are places here in the Pacific Northwest, particularly the western parts of the states, where the climate is temperate, and there are lovely deciduous woods, and the birds are recognizable, and there are weird things like coyotes and raccoons. I hate raccoons, but
me too. They have
some people like them, but I hate them with passion because they chase our cats and they've killed a lot of our neighbor cats. So I'm not a fan.
I totally understand that. They have come to Germany. Raccoons have come to Germany, and they're absolutely And over here it's even worse because we have like no predators that might
Mm.
even. I mean, we have a couple of wolves, but that's it. Okay, so apparently you're so frozen that people can hear you.
Yeah, no, I mean, the screen is completely frozen for me.
Weird. Well, apparently, yeah, people can still hear you, so I guess that's fine. Wonder what's going on there. Anyway, after that, yes, so changing the world by fiction. I think that's something that a lot of authors share. I wonder how many readers are aware of the fact that when they're reading books, they they do that. They're actively sort of changing their mind while reading the book.
I think some readers know that very well, and I think some readers actively seek it out. Like
Yeah,
they want to think and feel differently. They are. I think that's why. And again, another sweeping statement. Perhaps the origin of genre, right? People
yeah,
want to feel a certain thing. They are actively seeking it.
yeah,
And some of those people who seek to feel that thing know that it's really good for them in some way that they can't quite put their finger on. So
yeah,
in science fiction, that would be the sense of wonder, the sense of trying to find a solution while dealing with something amazing. In romance, it's happy ever after. Okay, now everything's completely vanished.
interesting. Well, it's still audible. Apparently. People
Oh,
still say,
yay, yay, we're back.
"Hooray!"
Yay. Oh, excellent.
Yeah, computers. Uh, yeah. So to go back to Spear, you wrote about the fact that you, I recently saw that on your website, and you talked about the fact that people ask you whether you will go back to Nemo and Peridor and see and write more about them, but you're reluctant about it. Like, how did you? What happened? What made you decide to go and write about Peridor in the first place? And why go with Peridor in more like the
Well,
Welsh way?
actually, I got asked to contribute a short story to an anthology of Arthurian retellings. They wanted race-bent, queer, inclusive Arthurian retellings. And I'm like, you know, it can't be done. To do that and for it to still feel Arthurian, that sense of radical belonging to the land
Yeah,
that to me it's based on. And
yeah,
given the manifest destiny nativist crap that is baked into the Arthurian legend, I thought, no, not possible. And so I turned them down. But I was at that point researching 6th century place name etymology, basically, to figure out what some places would have been called so that I could finish the maps I was making. Because there are some places that have no believable names, only names that really began sometime after Doomsday Book.
yeah.
So I was trying to figure out realistically what they might sound like. And so I came across, so I started learning a lot about Old Welsh, which is as far back as you can go to, as far back as I can go. Anyway, I'm sure there are people who can do better.
Yeah,
To the original Brittonic.
yeah,
And I found that this word, bir hudir, actually means hard spear. And I thought, hang on, bir hudir, it's like peritier, because B
yeah,
became P, etc.
yeah.
And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. And then I got asked again to contribute to the anthology. And I was about to say no when this memory suddenly dropped into my head of this etymological name. And then I don't know why or how, all of a sudden, I really could see a way to combine Welsh history with Irish myth and English legend, and it would kind of get rid of all that nativist crap.
Yeah.
and it was because I could figure out. Oh well, never mind. There's too much detail. But so then I was on fire. I thought, well, because I've always loved Arthurian stuff. I just never wanted to write it because I didn't think I could write my kind of book and still for it to feel Arthurian. So Spear started as a short story. I sat down to write a short story called Red about Peretir, and suddenly, wow, I was just on fire. I mean, I wrote Spear in 17 days. I just went wham, and it was great.
One thing that I found interesting, what you just said with your research, like how much of your process as a writer is just reading stuff, more or less random stuff, or and filing away those bits and pieces that might come in handy later, because you never know what will connect to what else.
I think almost all of it. Hold on one second. I just have to get another beer.
Yeah, of course.
My stash. I have a cooler right by the desk, so lots of it. I mean, story. Okay, I'm gonna say something that I don't know if it will get me kicked out of the secret writers club, but anytime a writer tells you exactly where a story came from, here's the origin story, it's bullshit, because it's what we figured out after the fact. Where it actually comes from, I certainly don't know. I mean, I could tell probably 5 different origin stories about Hild, but the Whitby one I know lies at the heart of everything, because in fact, Whitby and Ammonites and all the things I discovered in Whitby lie at the heart of. I mean, my first book was called Ammonite, for God's sake. You know, it's just like that. At some level, the truth is that it lies at the heart of everything.
So that trip in general, that trip in general.
Yeah. So, but yes, everything. So Slow River, my second novel, it's set in a wastewater treatment plant in the near future in the north of England, and that came from when Kelly, my wife, my sweetie at the time, because marriage, she worked at an environmental engineering company, and she would bring home catalogs of things like 6 dozen drench hoses and 2 neoprene protective suits, and all the gear. And then I started seeing articles, because the reticular activating system, right? Once you start thinking about something, you start seeing other things. And then I started seeing articles here and there in different kinds of journals about wastewater management and aquaculture. And so then I got really interested, and then I started sort of building equations in my head, and I started imagining these huge engineering projects where you could fix chemically polluted waters using the sun and gravity and all kinds of stuff. And then thinking about how to build a whole self-contained, bring in wastewater and produce more oxygen and fish from that. And everything came from there. Plus, at the same time, I had this question in my head about my own past, where I spent 10 years living in a very miserable city, where basically living with lowlives. I hung with prostitutes and murderers, and I was officially unemployed for probably 5 years, but earning my money in ways that we don't generally discuss in polite society. But I got out of there. And then a lot of people who seemed to be in the same place, they didn't. So my question was, what makes somebody able to get out and other people not? And it turned out that basically the question is an illusion, that we are never in the same place. 2 people can seem to be in the same place, but they come from different places. They have different attributes, and so they are not in the same place.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful recognition, because a lot of conversations we have, it's like, I got out of there. I'm that survivor bias that so many of us have, depending on, if we have like any form of marginalization, whatever it is, like, I made it. So you can, I was like, no,
No,
we're not the same.
exactly. We are not the same. Nobody
Yeah.
is the same.
Yeah. So that's a very powerful one. Yeah, I just found this very interesting, the way you talked about how different things might, you know, kind of go into this brain, that like the writer's brain, sort of, and at some point it bubbles over because a bunch of things. It's a bit like, creation in a way. When you have like creation, the beginning of life, when you have like all this stuff bubbling around in the sea, and suddenly some bits connect to something, and suddenly you have like a larger connection of atoms, and suddenly it turns into life, and then you have a story in a way. I think a lot of it is like that. And even though you start researching something and looking at something, these bits may still end up somewhere else afterwards, because they're just, the world's cool, right? It's full of cool stuff, and the sorting is sort of what we do when we
I
write.
remember many years ago, before my mum died, I was it was we were helping arrange someone's funeral, or I can't even remember what it was, but we got a bunch of cut flowers and we had to arrange them.
Yeah.
And I was saying, okay, here's how you do it. There's a very simple way to think of it. You go tall down here and then out here and then something to.
Yeah.
How do you know that? How do you know all these things, Nicola? I said, well, I just read a lot. And it's true. I mean, I'm sure someone described that method of flower arranging in some novel I read, or some New Yorker article that was actually about music or something. I don't know. And these things, they just stick in my head, and then they stick to something else in my head. And then the next thing you know, everything popped out neatly constructed, and I had no idea I was working on it.
Yeah. Okay, so you just mentioned your mother for a moment there. I don't want to go down that, but a lot of your stories have a very, like, that sort of tension of a mother-daughter relationship that happens in Hild, that happens in Spear, it definitely happens in So Lucky as well. Is that just something that sticks out because, most male authors never write about mother-daughter relationships, or is it something that is important to you as a writer?
I think both. I think, to start with, I wanted mothers to be very complicated. We get simple tales of mothers. We get the evil stepmother. We get the saintly mother who often dies and sacrifices a lot. We get the enemy mother. We get the clinging mother. But they're all such stereotypes. And so for me, I wanted the mothers, and of course, my prime example was my own mother, who was very smart, who had had a difficult childhood.
Yeah.
And she was a super Catholic. She loved me and I loved her, and she did not approve at all of me in my life. Like, I'm wasting all my gifts because I wouldn't, I didn't go to university and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And B, why couldn't I just settle down with some nice boy and have babies? But we had a lot of respect for each other. I admired her tremendously. And she taught me many interesting things. And so I think for me, mother-daughter relationships are fraught sometimes. They can be amazingly powerful. And they are mixed. They change. They are not simple things.
It's honestly it's I grew up with my mother as a single mother, and her mother, so my grandmother's husband died fairly early on. So I grew up in a household with like 3 generations of women, like my sister, my mother, and my grandmother. And when I read the way you describe these mother and daughter relationships in your books, they feel real. Like I've seen this. It feels real in a way that I've rarely encountered in books. And I just found it interesting because, like, no matter which of your books I start, I'm like, oh, there's the mother-daughter relationship. It's there.
Yeah.
And it will be messy and will be complicated. I know that.
So there's this, I don't know where this myth got started, but there's this, I think it's pernicious story, particularly in this country, that women are their own worst enemy. Like women are rivals. Women will cut you down. And I have to say that is not my experience of life at all. I think possibly I've just been lucky, but no, women have always been great allies for me. And quite a few men have been great allies too. So, you know.
Yeah, I think uh, there's certainly something in there, but I don't think it's like a women-specific thing, right? If at all, it's sort of the problem that if you have like if you're not part of the dominant group, so to speak, and you make it there, there's because you have less resources, you have to in a system that is built on competition. That competition may become more vicious, but we then turn that into like a narrative that is tied to gender, to gender instead of just the fact that there's like a scarcity of resources that leads to like
Yep.
a stronger competition. And I think that might be part of that narrative,
Mhm.
where that comes from, maybe.
But also, but weighed against that, there's the whole history of oppressed people banding together. So,
Yeah,
I want that story told more.
yeah, but that's definitely the better story. I think that's part of the like that narrative of in what you just mentioned, like women being mean to each other. That's still a story that's mostly told by men, right? It's a story from the outside where people sort of see that competition up to a point and then turn that into a narrative, but it's not the people actually in that situation of marginalization.
Mhm.
So I think it's an outside narrative in a lot of them, but I don't know where it started.
Nor me. But we don't have to go to the chicken or the egg, although that has been proved now definitively.
It has. I didn't check, but okay.
Yeah, yes. Well, what with the dinosaurs and things.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Egg,
In that case,
eggs,
definitely
eggs
eggs
for the
before
win.
chickens.
Mhm.
True. Uh, yeah. So that's another question. Like, are you constantly working on more than one book, or is it more like how are you doing that? Because between Hild and Menewood, there's like a decade's time when you wrote all the stuff in between. Like, or do you have like something like the Hild project? Let's call it the Hild experiment. Is that like an
Hmm.
ongoing thing? And if your mind goes somewhere else, you just do something else, and Hild is always growing in the background, or how do
Yeah.
you approach
Well, yes, 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 and no, and maybe. I my phew, I have this whole bunch of different ponds, I suppose, in my head that are constantly overlapping and splashing into each other, and then some of them expand and gradually subsume others, and that becomes the main thing. And some just stubbornly hang out there. I mean, I've got ideas. One day I might want to write that they've been sort of hanging out in my head for 25 years. Maybe one day. Actually, no, think of it. The better way to think about it is it's like I have a bunch of planes circling overhead.
Yeah.
And, they all have a limited amount of fuel. And at some point, if one's really important, you have to land it and you have to work on it. And then some of the others gradually run out of fuel and just crash and burn and go away. But there are
Yeah.
always more being launched. It's like a constant launching. I mean, ideas are everywhere. But yes, I absolutely want to write more Perretier. I
Okay.
just don't know when, and I don't know. It won't be the form that. Yeah, it's going to be possibly not what people would expect.
Yeah.
I want to have some fun with it. I want there to be lots of little Easter eggs in there for at least the
Yeah.
first little bit for Arthurian nerds. And if you miss the Easter eggs, it will not detract from the story at all. That's my hope. Anyway.
Okay. that sounds. So here's the thing. That's a personal question. Will Deacon James meet um, the cowherd Cadman in the future of Hill? Do you know that already?
I'm sorry. Will
Will Deacon James meet Cadman the cowherd?
will James meet Cadman?
Yes.
I have no idea.
Because Cadman loves music and James loves music.
No. Well, that's a good. Well, let me think about that. Right now, I don't know, but let me think about it. I don't see why not. I mean, like they become all these people are interconnected, and of course, Hild fell in love with music partly because of Deacon James, and then of course, Cadman schooled her on listening for music and things.
Yeah, and I mean, I just always assume that Cadman will be the Cadman that is mentioned there.
Oh, he totally is. Yes.
Yeah. I was like, that's the one.
Absolutely. Yes, he is.
And
I love the idea of a Cadman, like the father of English literature. Basically being a wide boy, who gets into fights.
Yeah, that was
more like Marlowe than Shakespeare.
Marlowe, see, I've always made that analogy. It's like, if Shakespeare is the Beatles of English literature, then Marlowe is the Who, and I'm very much on the Who's side in that regard. But so that's just something I just always was like, will James and Cadman meet to talk about music? That would be awesome.
It hadn't occurred to me, but I really, it's entirely possible.
Yeah. Another thing that did you know? So there is that part in that Bede has when they talk about the switch, Edwin switching to Christianity. The part about the bird flying through the house, and you took that from and put it in that speech as well, which I love. Do you think? Do you know where Bede got that from? Because it feels like one of these narratives, like life is like one of these bird flying through a house, and it's one of those tropes. Like, is that one of the bits that Bede got from like a Greek or like a classic that he kind of cannibalized into his story, or do you think he came up with that? Do you know that?
I have no idea. Actually, I suspect it was it feels like it has the feel of a well-worn saying already.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know if it was a joke. I don't know if it was just some tedious person of Bede's acquaintance that was always using that metaphor, and he finally said, "Okay, I'm going to put it in my book." I don't know,
which
but
would totally fit with Bede.
It does have that feel to it
because we're still using it. Terry Pratchett makes jokes about it, and at that point, it's like a classic part of like English language. That Terry Pratchett makes a joke about it at some point.
Yeah, I really enjoyed putting that in Hild. Which well, that was a very stupid bird.
Yeah, I was reading. I was like, oh right, Bede had the same thing, and like the scene of the Norse priest going over and actually destroying his own temple. How much inspiration did you need for that the way you described the temple? Did you look at like remains of stuff, or did you
there is no information.
That's my thought. It's like, hey,
no, I just
have I missed something, or did you make that up?
Because it just seemed like okay. I think the people of that era, certainly the Germanic influenced people, I have a hard time calling them Anglo-Saxons, so let's call them the English. That works.
Yeah.
We know that they had a preference for trees. They used trees in their building. They used trees as part of their, we think, possibly part of their religious practice.
Yeah.
And so, and then that's where they had, I imagine they have kind of totems the way that some Native American tribes have totems, like Coast Salish tribes here in the Northwest. They have great totems. So I was thinking, and so many religious practices have this notion of moving into the center. And many of them use mind-altering substances as part of a celebration and a ceremony. And so I just sort of combined those all with this whole made-up tale of ethnogenesis. I mean, I knew, even as I was writing that scene of all the pictures telling the story of them coming there and what happened, I knew that that wasn't true. But I also knew that it was probably the story they were telling themselves to give themselves legitimacy. So it was this really difficult path to tread, while also thinking, wow, what kind of pictures would that be, and how would they make those pictures, and what form would it take? So, oh no, I loved writing that scene. It was one of those, I am just purely making shit up here and having the best time.
Yeah, I think that scene when Hild walks into the temple, like the before the desecration, just like walks into it like one last time. Like, that's just such a powerful scene, like in a way that I'm not a very visual person in general, but one of those things. Yeah, I can feel that. I can visualize, like I can feel being there, walking down that path and looking at that. That was just like really, really powerful in that way. I was, hey,
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Inspiration for that.
Yeah, no, I just researched what I could and then made it up.
I mean,
that's why.
Yeah. Okay, Paramita asks if you'd be interested in writing a non-fiction text on all the research you've done for Hild.
I would be very happy, perhaps working with someone, but I think, generally speaking, no. I think in a simple word, no. I'm happier with fiction. I do want to collect all the essays I've written. I mean, honestly, I've written enough essays to maybe do 3 books, but I could probably get one really good book of essays. So I'd love to do that. And somewhere there's a group of academics putting together a Hild Companion, which is basically going to be a teaching aid for people who use, because quite a few people apparently use Hild in their either Old English classes or history classes. Excuse me. So yeah, that I've been sort of vaguely involved with, but actually writing a whole book, no.
So that's a question that I've had personally. Like, you've obviously written Spear as this Arthurian retelling, and now you're writing Hild. But for historians, when people like in the academic context come to the table with a new or different vision, those who need to cite a lot of stuff and try to fight for your interpretation of the evidence in a very specific way. Is there a similar feeling when you're writing historical fiction about a place and time, and your vision is your idea is different from what you might call the mainstream of historical fiction at the time? Is there like that pressure that you need to do something to make people actually sit up and take note and go like, well, maybe that's actually how it was? Because we're still doing like interpretation. It's still about like building that image of the past in ways. Like, and with something like Hild, you're going against like a long established image of like how 7th century Britain works. Do you feel that pressure that you need to prove something for people to take you seriously with that?
Yes and no. I feel the need to make sure that I can point to the book and say, there is nothing here that you can prove didn't happen, that couldn't happen. That is true. And to begin with, I worried that, there's a really big difference between a 16-year-old Hild in my book and the eventual sort of motherly, saintly Saint Hilda that Bede paints. It's a big difference. But as I point out to everybody, you don't get to be a saint by being a nice person. I mean, you just don't. If you look at someone like Mother Teresa, she was, by all accounts, very not a really saintly, nice person. She did amazing things in the world, but she wasn't very nice, and she couldn't afford to be a wilting flower. She couldn't be a wallflower. And so I felt quite happy making Hild a strong person. But then you introduce, oh yeah, she kills people too. And then you bring in, oh yeah, and she had sex with a lot of women. And so let me tell a quick story about the very first book event for Hild that I did in England. It was in Stockton-on-Tees, a northern town. And I didn't know what to expect. I walked in, and there were a bunch of people coming in. There was a table full of wine and wine glasses. And I thought, whoa, they don't do this in America. I like this. This is good. And then in marched like a dozen nuns in the full habit, like the whole old school thing.
Yeah.
And they all sat down on the front row, and they looked at me, and they folded their arms. And I thought, oh no. So basically I sort of glanced to the side and said, just fill their glasses, keep them supplied with wine. And I just started talking and reading and blah, blah, blah. And it turned out that the reason they were all bent, they were actually the nuns of the Holy Paraclete, and who are Hild's nuns. They are Hild's order.
Yeah.
It's like the closest you can get to Hild. And they come there to tear me a new one. And they'd done that because they had seen the cover, the American cover of the book, where Hild is in basically chainmail, which we all know didn't happen, couldn't happen, didn't happen at the time. And I said, so I talked about the cover, and I said, the anachronism is appalling, and the cover is beautiful because of these here reasons, and that's why I allowed it. And I talked about Bede, and I talked about all the research I had done. And by the end, they were like, "This is so cool! You need to come to the Abbey and hang out." Oh, why? It was kind of amazing. I figured if I can persuade those nuns, then yeah, I'm doing okay.
All right, I need to ask about the hedgepigs. Why are you calling them hedgepigs, not hedgehogs? Is that is there a specific reason? Because when us non-English folks learn English, we only learn hedgehog as a term, which obviously is the same as hedgepig, just very much gendered to male pigs.
Yeah, partly because two reasons.
Okay.
I don't know where it comes from, but when I wrote it down the first time, I thought, I like that. It has a much friendlier sound than hog. Pig is friendlier than hog. There's just there's a different feel in the mouth, and in the face forms a different shape, which feels more friendly. So yeah, I really couldn't tell you why, but I kept doing it because I think it works.
Yeah, it definitely does. I'm like, oh, that's like one of the words I associate with hills, like hedgehog. The other one is obviously red crest, which Romans, which kind of, I think that's sort of one of the moments when I read you calling the Romans red crest, people calling the Romans red crest. And that's exactly how a lot of these post-apocalyptic people talk about the stuff in the past, when they kind of make up a word to explain this. If the more 1980s, 70s, 80s post-apocalyptic stuff. Your sometimes even your Canticle for Leibowitz, when people take terms and kind of describe them in a way, and part of the joke is that you as the reader know what is meant by it, and you kind of make that connection, and gives that feeling of disconnect.
It's the historical equivalent of cognitive estrangement, right?
Yeah.
And it's also what it does that estrangement, as in when you're reading science fiction, it makes the reader work just a bit harder to begin with. And the harder
Mhm.
you work for something, and then when you get it, you feel a sense of ownership of it.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's also a writerly trick. It's, as I said to my editor, I said, if someone reads the first 50 pages of Hild, I own them. Because if they will have had to do all this work to make sense of things.
Yeah, and you feel part of this like community with the writers. Like, yeah,
Yes.
us both. We
Yeah.
understand this.
We get this. We're with you now. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's partly that, but also, I mean, I had such initial conversations with my agent and my editor about Hild. I sent them this book. They were like, "What the hell is this?" They'd never seen anything like it. And they said, "Well, you have to explain this." I said, "No, I don't." I said, "Well, you have to explain this." I said, "No, I don't." I said, "You have to, otherwise." I said, "No. Anyone who's not willing to do that kind of work isn't going to enjoy this book.
Yeah.
So let's just have that 50-page filter. Let's just say, yeah, get through that, and it's your work."
Yeah. A bit
It
of
did
a
persuade
shift
me of
because
one thing, though,
a bit of a shift that I
because
thought I really
initially it had no chapters.
it had no chapters.
No
I
chapters.
love books. I love books with no chapters, but I understand
Yeah.
that
And they
a
persuade
lot
me.
of people find them frustrating.
I put chapters in, yeah.
That's something I wanted to ask you, because there's a huge shift in structure between Hild and Menewood, right? Menewood, you have the separation in like different books and
Mhm.
then chapters.
Mhm.
What made you decide to go that route between Hild and Menewood?
Because the book is so long.
Yeah.
I mean, Hild was long.
Yeah.
Meanwood is more than 30% longer.
Mhm.
Um, and because parts of it are a little slower.
Mhm.
And so I wanted readers to have a real sense of, you read that every part has this bit at the beginning that says places that Hild went and what
Yeah.
the time frame is. I wanted the reader to be able to just get an instant sense of that, like of how much we're moving along.
Mhm. A bit of an anchor to like our time.
Yeah. So what the speed of this part will be, and
Mhm.
where we are, because it really is and so many of the terms are unfamiliar, and some of the ways of thinking are unfamiliar.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I was just like, when I started meeting with them, I'm like, okay, this is different. Suddenly we have like explanations of what happens. Whereas uh, my first my first idea was like, well, maybe it's because Hild is like much more in control of her own life now. So there is a level of control and understanding of where things are going compared to young Hild growing up. And when you, as a child, you grow up, there's this feeling of timelessness in a way, right?
Mhm.
You're always surprised how quickly your birthday comes around again, or how long it takes.
Yes.
And time is more flexible when you're a child. Hill being a child, slowly growing up, that made sense to me. And then I read Menewood, and was like, suddenly this is someone who actually has. Not only does you have a lot of responsibility because Hild has a lot of responsibility early on, but like someone who's sort of owning that and taking that to new places. And that's that
You
level of
know,
control.
you're absolutely right. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that is part of it. The fact that Hild is now the CEO of her world, and she
Yeah.
needs her planning document. These are her strategy documents in a way. This is like this notion of this number of weeks, and or here are the things that have to be
Yeah.
achieved by quarter six, or I'll get, like there is no quarter six, but
Yeah.
or I'll get thrown out. It's yeah, interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, that's interesting. One thing I definitely want to go back to is the idea of Hild building her community building as something that we need to do as humans, and something that often gets kind of pushed aside in a lot of fiction, where it's more like the found family stuff like
Mhm.
that. And so much of Meanwood being about Hild building a place for herself, building a community, selecting people, and getting it wrong sometimes in the way she tries to over control that process of trying to figure out how to build a community with people that can trust each other. That's something I found really interesting and something as a contrast to a lot of historical fiction and fantasy fiction, where it's more about the fighting and maybe the misfit band that just like happens to be perfect for each other. So that the fact that it's work, I found that really interesting. Like, was that like a deliberate decision? Is that something that kind of evolved over time?
It wasn't deliberate, and I have always had a bit of a problem of these instant found families. It's like reaching into a bag of jigsaw bits and tossing them
Yeah,
in there, and they all fall down in the perfect pattern. It's like, oh, I mean, how often does that happen? Except in books, it seems to happen all the time. You just
yeah,
bump into so and so on the road, and they turn out to be, oh yeah, just exactly who you need.
yeah,
So I needed it to be a bit more deliberate, a bit more thought out, a bit more vital. Also, I mean,
yeah,
it's not like building a band, except of course it is, but it's building the band that has to save the universe as well.
yeah. I just found it very interesting, that especially like the stuff happening around Menewood and how Hild kind of tries to build these things. You have the training montage when Hild goes hunting with her young with the young fighters, and
Mm-hmm.
shows them these different aspects to explain her strategy, so to speak. I just read and I was like, wow, this is like the next level of like, explaining, doing the nature thing, but
Mm.
also making it meaningful for the story afterwards. And it was, how long did it take to actually build that? How, to sort of, was that like something you had in mind before? Like, hey, I want to do this, or is it something that evolved over time?
No, it evolved in the writing because
Okay.
honestly, the last 40 or maybe 45% of Menewood I wrote in one 6-month stretch. Right after Spear. I finished the first
Yeah,
draft of Spear, put it aside,
yeah,
went back to Menewood and went. And all this stuff was just coming together. And I was like, oh, right, hunting, except she's not. Hunting is what she's doing. It's not a clash of armies. It's survival. And I was like, whoa, yeah. And it just
yeah.
all poured together, like
Mhm.
all the little tributaries that had started over the years, were all just cascading down now.
Yeah.
And then something about the glory of writing Spear just opened my brain so wide, and everything just went, and it came together beautifully.
So that's something I find interesting. Like I wanted to ask you about, is like how Spear does sort of complement Hild and Meanwood in a way, because with Spear obviously you can go places that you can't do with Hild and Meanwood.
That was actually one of the funnest parts about writing Spear was like, this is it almost the same feel as Hild.
Mm.
But whereas Hild's relationship to nature appeared to be magical, she deliberately made it appear magical.
Yeah.
Paratia's relationship with nature really is magical. And that was so freeing, being able to have Paratia actively talk to nature, to have the wind, to have a snowflake tell her about this place far away. I mean, not actually sit down and say, hey, dude, here's what's going, but to
Yeah.
give that taste of the place that she could know magically.
There was some bits and pieces in Spear, especially with Peretia and her horse. And like I've done horse riding before, and a lot. Like, I like horses a lot. It's like this connection where suddenly you understand what your horse, what your animal is feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and that connection, and I felt that just like only turn up to 11 basically. Suddenly,
Yeah, that's it. It's what I suppose it's what I think, how I imagine we all wish our relationship
yes,
with nature was. So that I thought, well, why not? Let's give people what they want. Let's give me what I want. I want to read this book. So
Yeah, it's that feeling when you know when you have like a pack that you're really friendly with, or as I said, like with the horses you're riding somewhere out in the middle of nowhere. It's like, and you feel like you're on the kind of threshold to that understanding, but it's obviously not there.
Mm-hmm.
And compared to that connection, felt like, yeah, what if we can actually cross that threshold?
What if we could actually blend these
Yeah,
emotional and mental biospheres in
yeah,
this? Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I did really appreciate that part. Um, okay, one other question. Like, when you talk about white meat, you mean like basically the stuff when you distill by freezing it, right?
Yes, yeah. Basically, yeah.
Ha.
It's basically in the US, it's called basically it's like making Applejack. You
Yeah, I know.
take a bunch of cider out, and then you freeze it, and then you take the liquid out, and then you
Yeah,
freeze the liquid, and then you take what's left of the liquid out, and then it's quite strong.
yeah. I've left last year. I left a barrel of my own meat out on the balcony, and I threw it. I know what happens. Not necessarily something I can recommend.
I made
Or at least,
a still when I was 15.
yeah.
Holy shit. I took the first sip, and I literally, the next thing I knew, I was against the wall on the other side. I think I went, whoa, and shot.
Well, I mean, that's
Never
part of
again.
like the distilling process. Right? You need to actually put away the first batch because it's.
Yes, I didn't know that. I knew enough to run it through the charcoal and stuff, but I didn't know you weren't supposed to drink the very. I mean, I was, oh my god, I thought I was going to die. It was like my poor brain. Yeah.
Well, to be fair, that's exactly what would have happened if there was enough of that stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Ooh.
Yeah, there's like if you're okay, I want to switch like for a moment to So Lucky, a book that I read earlier this year, and that meant a lot to me personally because there's some things in there that you get right that I've rarely found anyone getting right, like expressing things that I felt in a way that I found really impressive, especially the airport situation with the wheelchair you put in the book.
Yeah.
And as a blind person, I go to an airport and I need assistance, of course.
Mm-hmm.
They pack me in a wheelchair as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Oh, they do.
Why?
And every time it's like, do I make a fuss out of this, or do I just like because they're probably like on minimum wage and they have to do this.
I hear you.
100
Yeah.
people in like the next hour. What to do now?
Mm.
But the way of like you become an object you become a package that needs to be pushed around.
Yes, because you are a problem to start
Yes.
with, rather than
Yeah.
you are a problem that then becomes a package.
Yeah, and I read them as like I read like stuff like Sarah Ahmed before on being included, things like that before. And it's like, but I've never read anyone like put it this the feeling that comes with that in such precise words. It's like, yeah, this is it. It's like this is why this is why I get pissed off when I'm flying.
It is yeah, the only 2 times in the last 30 years that I've come close to actually fighting, like a physical fight with someone, has both been in airports.
Yeah.
Because they are just these pressure cookers of stress and horror.
Yeah,
and we all get pushed around, not just Crips. We all get pushed around, but
exactly.
get pushed around even more, and it just reaches a point where, whew.
Yeah, and I always feel like bad in that situation because I know that the person who has to deal with me, who has to deal with that problem, is also under like tons of stress. They're not the people,
Mm-hmm.
They're not the people who made the decision to be an asshole to me. They're the people who have to actually deal with like 10,000 things at the same time.
Yeah.
But I just want to say thank you for that because that meant a lot for me to read that. I was like, finally, someone gets it. Obviously, for reasons. But,
I would say it was my pleasure, but I kind of wish that there was never a situation where either of us ever felt that way. You are most welcome. Yeah.
Thank How cathartic did it feel to write that book, though? Or
So,
was it like, how much of a struggle is it to write that kind of stuff?
um, writing that book was very interesting.
Mhm.
The first iteration was probably about 20 years earlier. I wrote a novella quite similar, but not
Mhm.
really, but with many of the elements of it.
Yeah.
And actually sold it to a magazine for what at the time was a splendid sum. But it nagged at me. I just thought, this isn't right. I don't, not right, not right, not right. And eventually I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. I knew there was something wrong with it, couldn't figure out what. And so I pulled it and gave the money back.
Mhm.
And I stuck it in a drawer. And I thought about it on and off for years. I kept
Mhm.
thinking, what is the problem with that? It's a great, what's the problem with it? And it
Yeah.
was when I was basically first coming out as a cripple and then started really talking to the disability community that I understood what the problem with the original story was, that the ending, it relied on this, the word has escaped me, that sudden realization, epiphany.
Epiphany.
It relied
It's
on an
very soon, 6%
epiphany,
January.
or suddenly she understood, and it's
Yeah.
like, no, that is not good enough. That's just
No.
bullshit. And so I thought, yeah, one day I'm going to rewrite that. And then when I was doing my PhD, I had just sent in my thesis to my advisor to get feedback, and it was over the winter holidays, so I knew I would have 3 weeks to
Mm.
basically wait. And so I thought about this story again. And I thought, let me pull that out. Let me have a look.
Mm.
And so basically I read it and then threw it away and completely redid it. So then I wrote So Lucky again in 3 weeks, and then went back to my thesis, got my PhD, and then went back to So Lucky and rewrote
Mm.
it and sent it out. So the actual simple scenes, each scene, it wasn't hard at all. It was quite cathartic. It was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I'm finally gonna get to say this. All right, eat this. It was
Yeah. What I find interesting, how honest it is, because it's like something I've realized over time, coming to terms with, like, for a time I spent some time at a boarding school for blind people. It's like the level of internalized ableism with people that grow up in, like, different, in my case, just like visually impaired and blind people, the level of internalized ableism in these communities is incredibly high, and
it's
it's so
sky
difficult to get out of that.
sky high, and the reason is because we have no countervailing argument. Ableism
Yeah,
is a crap story, but it's a very strong story,
yeah,
and more to the point, it's the story we grow up with, and
yeah. It's
so.
like
So Lucky is designed to be one of the stories, and we need so many of them that
mm,
will start eating away at that monolithic nonsense.
yeah, yeah. And I read that, it's like, yeah, so much of that, I get it. And then I go back and like look at like how my time at school was like, yeah, the people that are just like sort of just, quotes, visually impaired. They, they look down on the people that are completely blind, and there's this like weird hierarchy we build
Oh my God, yes. Oh
inside.
yes.
And
Yep.
I'm like, that's ridiculous. We should get our torches and pitchforks and go out there together. But like instead, we're all doing this competition. Who's the most normal, so to, the least despicable? And I was like, that's fucked up,
Yes. Yeah,
and it's
really.
so difficult to get out of that.
Mhm. Yeah, you see it in every oppressed group in the world.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're definitely right. You see it everywhere. Like obviously, for me being the kind of person I am with the background I am, that's the one oppressed group I'm in. But also, I think it's what you said. There's no countervailing argument. It's very difficult to go out there. It's like because there is always that like sort of like sort of physical, pseudo-physical, whatever you want to call it, arguments like, yeah, but you have a disability. There is definitely something wrong. We can go as like, well, skin color doesn't impact your ability to work or whatever. Neither does gender. It's like, you're blind or you have a physical disability, you will not become a pilot and driver or whatever. There are things you just can't do. There is something that within our world, so it's much more difficult in that regard. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, other groups have had like much more oppression, but it's more difficult to overcome that one because there is that sort of external, like pseudo objective argument out there that we need to overcome in a way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Sure. And then you also look at the fact that if you look at, well, someone with muscular dystrophy can't work moving boxes, it's like, well, certain boxes you can only pick them up using a mechanical device. So, and these days you can do everything from like a Xbox controller type thing. So how much,
you can't reach that. Well, you can reach that.
Yeah, I mean, you can do all kinds of. All I'm saying is that every human being on Earth has a limitation, and we get help, whether we're talking a bulldozer or a pickup truck or a pallet loader, or we get help.
Yeah. Just like to say, biggest band is like yay for mead. Yes, I switched from beer to my own mead because I made new mead recently, and I have to try. It's self-made mead with a peach juice added.
How is it?
Sweet. It's mostly sweet.
So someone we knew back in the day for our first wedding in 1993 made mead as their wedding present. So because we were very poor, we had no money. We had $500 for the whole wedding, everything included, except the ring. We paid extra for that.
Yeah.
And so someone gave us free flowers. This guy made us mead, and a little while ago on our 25th anniversary, we opened the one remaining bottle of that mead, and it was sound as a nut. It was great.
Yeah.
It was just
we did this.
It was unbelievable. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, it's like wine in that way. It doesn't actually, if you keep it closed, it doesn't go bad or anything.
Mm-hmm.
We did the same thing. Like I started making mead back in the day with my first flatmate. So we both went home to visit our families over Christmas, and we come back home back in December. It's like, let's make mead. So we walked to the next village because that's where they had like a farmer supply place. We need like one of those barrels and like a fermentation lot, the whole thing. You need to actually make wine or mead or whatever. And so we do that. We then go to the supermarket and buy way too much honey. Like when we actually walk back from the village, from the next village, is like it's a small town. It's 20 minutes, half an hour walk basically, and it starts snowing like hell. We're trudging through the snow carrying the stuff we bought to make alcohol, and then we just like put it into our bathroom because like the bathroom was like the one place that had continuously the same temperature basically. And then we started making meat, and like 2 years ago he came to visit me to bring me that barrel because we moved apart and whatnot, and he brought one of the bottles from that first batch of meat we made back like a decade ago. And yeah, it still works. It's still good in that regard.
Pretty amazing.
To go back to Hild and Menewood though, how do you come up with the different, like you have the whole thing with like the different names that you collect, that Hild collects over, and like is that something that evolved naturally, or is it something that you at some point is like, I want to have her have these different names?
No, that came about completely just in the first few pages where they first talked to her as Little Prickle.
Yeah.
That was like, oh, but that just seemed like a nickname. I didn't think anything of it. And then when someone called her Heartess, I didn't again think much of it, but then gradually, by the time she got to the place where she's fighting the bandits, and then her people paint the shields,
Yeah.
then it's like, yeah, 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 okay, I can see this could be a thing. But it took that long. All the clues were there. They just hadn't really come together until
Mhm.
she got really. Actually, you know, sometimes these realizations about Hild come when I swap into some other character's point of view. When Hild is doing something
Mhm.
kind of eyebrow raising, and I don't want to get too close to it by being closer to her point of view.
Yeah.
So, you know, like when Eric is basically the lady is being hard and mean and entering her butcher bird phase, we
Yeah.
suddenly see her from Eric's perspective, and then it's like, yeah, she is the butcher bird. She is that persona. I get that sort of extra distance, and so that's kind of where Kaklu comes from too, like going into the point of view of the fearsomes and seeing
Mhm.
her from that perspective. It's
Yeah, I did really love the idea of the fearsomes when she has that group. They're all sort of like the outsiders, and that's
mm,
like the closest you found it, but they're still like working on it, right? And she
yeah.
still makes it work in a way. So
Mhm.
I did really appreciate that. Also, lynxes are really cool.
I'm sorry?
I said like also lynxes are
Oh,
really cool
yes.
animals.
Oh my God, yes. I was amazed when I realized that lynx
Hmm.
were in Britain, you know, at least through this, well, at least through the beginning of the 7th century.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, this is so cool.
we,
This is
we
one of
still
the
have,
reasons I write these books, right? This to find out stuff like that and think about, yay,
yeah,
what would it have been like to be like, I'm going to pick some carrots and oh my God, there's a lynx, you know.
we still have some lynxes in Germany, so there are still some out here, but they're very
Oh, like
few.
yeah, so like the big Iberian lynx, yeah, and not Iberian, the European lynx,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, there's like 2 or 3 habitats in Germany where there's still some of them. um, so yeah, the, the fearsomes. I just love that because the fearsomes is just such a cliche fantasy name for a group of heroes, and they're obviously not that. It felt almost like ironic in that way. It's like,
Mhm.
she's got her fearsomes. Oh,
Yeah. Well, it's like taking the name that you've been disparaged with.
yeah,
Like say,
exactly.
we're the faggots. We're the queers.
Yeah,
We're the Crips. Well,
and I
not those.
think there's something in there, that idea of taking a name, like owning a name and making it
Mhm.
your own in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's 7th century reclamation.
The
Yeah.
7th century reclamation. That's a very
Reclaim.
good way of describing it.
No,
um,
here's the thing. Most of those fearsomes, if you look at the odds, if you look at how many of those men got killed in that one engagement, the
yeah,
Battle of Hatfield, most of them should have died. And in fact, I decided that only one would survive, and that was going to be Lev Dowd. And then I just thought, no, I can't. I need those people back. So I gradually brought them back one by one. Yeah. And I really felt like if anyone ever points to something at the book that is really unrealistic,
it's those people do it. Yeah,
that's it. But I'm like, I don't care. I want these people.
but that's something I think that like sort of happens in fantasy. That is important as well. It's like, especially if we're part of different, outsider groups, whatever they may be,
Mhm.
we need that hope of maybe it's us who actually get through. We sometimes need that beacon of hope, of sort of wish fulfillment in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a role for it. I mean,
Yeah.
and there are many people who would sneer at that. Hold on one second. I need some more beer. Oh no! Where's all the beer? Okay, I got one left. This is the last one. I was so sad
I think
there.
we should we should take that as a sign. Just make
Yeah,
that
last beer.
last bit.
Oh, what was I saying? I completely lost track there.
The people steer at that like level of wish fulfillment that we sometimes need.
Yes, there is sneering because there's this whole notion that anything that turns out well or that has joy in it is less intellectual, it's less worthy, it's less good.
Yeah,
It is this whole well, it has an evolutionary base. The whole notion that you have to always pay more attention to the negative than the positive.
yeah,
You have to watch for the tiger. Knowing there's a tiger there is more
yeah,
important than knowing where the next crop of berries is, because you will maybe survive the lack of one, but you will not survive not knowing the other's there.
yeah.
So, but it has become ingrained in literary culture that anything that is hard and difficult and essentially negative and miserable is better. And
Yeah,
yeah.
I wonder how much of that is also like a very specific like Protestant influence that you need to work hard because if it's not if you haven't suffered for it, it's not actually deserved in a way. So you need to have that like
Oh,
bleakness
oh,
in there.
Calvinist crap. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm Catholic. I can shit on Calvinists. I mean, I'm baptized Catholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not exactly believing, but
Hmm.
But yeah, that idea that it has to be, you have to suffer for it because otherwise it's not worthy, and that has led to that level of like cynicism, and it has to be dark and bleak and hard, and whenever something is just
Mhm.
nice.
Yeah, but I think they're intimately tied together. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. And that's not my jam. No, I like some joy in my books.
yeah. I think it's changing. So it's interesting with especially like in the fantasy field, you have that idea that apparently cozy fantasy is on the rise now. Everyone's
Mhm.
like, oh, cozy fantasy is the next big thing. It's like, well, maybe it's because everyone's fed up with all that suffering, and maybe if we're people that have to suffer, especially like marginalized spirits, you look at the world as a queer person, as a person with disability, as a person of color, whatever. You look at the world, everyone is fighting you all the time. Maybe you just want to sit back and have a nice time for a moment.
Sure, absolutely. And historically speaking, science fiction has always been the genre for misfits anyway.
Yes.
And so, you go to any big convention and there's a lot of people there who find acceptance at that kind of place that they don't find in the rest of the world. And it's
Yeah. I think it's something that we need to be watchful of because there is a group of, very conservative people that the keep politics out of my fantasy, science fiction, historical fiction, whatever crowd that are trying to sort of keep that misfit thing out of science fiction. There's like, the people that felt that they were the misfits back in the day and don't understand that that means like misfits in general should also have access to that.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe,
but they're not our misfits. Yes,
yeah.
yes, yes. But every group goes through this,
Well,
right?
I've said that like at a festival when there was like one of those bands with like one misfit original musician. He's like, this is not my misfits. I don't think it should work for fantasy or science fiction or historical fiction or anything of the sort.
Yeah, I'm really I was really bothered a while ago where people were saying, "Oh my God, you've left science fiction and fantasy. You've left the." It's like, no, I'm still here. Really, seriously, I couldn't be writing any of the things I write now without having learned how to build worlds and my ideal readers are the kind of people who read science fiction and fantasy, and who read history, and who read crime fiction, and who, well, everything. My ideal reader is just a reader.
Yeah. And that's sort of like something that comes again, like with it being part of a marginalized group, right? It's like you found this group, and if someone leaves, you get mad at them for leaving because maybe they found the thing you've always dreamed of, but you've never allowed yourself to actually go there. The crab bucket analogy, basically. It's like we don't want people to leave the fantasy and science fiction community because that leaves us behind, and then we feel mad about them.
No, I'm still there.
Yeah. Okay, someone asked you what your favorite books are.
My favorite books. Well. I come back to old favorites. To me, a favorite book means something I will reread or do reread or have reread a lot in the last 20 years. So, Mary Stewart. I love The Crystal Cave. I think that's a wonderful book. The rest of her books become progressively less interesting to me, but The Crystal Cave, great book.
Is that where your fascination with Nemo comes from?
The Crystal Cave is what built my kind of yearning for the early medieval / late antiquity. So, the 5th, 6th, 7th century. So yeah, but it also built the Arthurian thing for me.
Yeah.
Other books. Let me see. I think my favorite novelist right now, sadly he's dead, so he's not right now, but my current favorite is Patrick O'Brian, who wrote basically 19th century naval fiction.
The Master Commander guy, right?
Yes. And those books are brilliant. Really, really, really good. I can't praise them enough. They are generous. They're specific. They are smart. They are full of joy, full of tragedy, full of tension. And parts of it are basically kind of like Jane Austen on a boat. So you've got your manners, you've got your war, you've got your politics, you've just got human nature. They are astonishingly good. And then gradually the series gets more and more self-referential and longer and ramblier, and well, like many series actually these days.
Yeah.
It just tails away. Especially after his wife dies. His books take a huge plunge when his wife dies. Very like Dick Francis's books did, actually, when his wife died. I think so many writers rely on their spouses so much. I dread Kelly dying. I mean, she doesn't write any of my books, but we talk about them all the time. And like every night when we settle down for a beer or wine, we talk about it.
I think that's an interesting part. Like how often we see the writer or the artist as like this monolith, right? The one person. Like, they live in like a network of people that they can trust and rely on, talk to, and figure things out.
Absolutely. Yeah, people to
whoever reads the acknowledgements in the book, right?
Oh, acknowledgements have changed so much, my God, in the last bazillion years. They used to be just like, and thank you for the people. They know who they are, And now it's like pages and pages and pages.
Yeah, that's an important aspect. Like as a writer, one person has to write down that stuff, but you still need to talk to people about it. Have that background, and yeah, I guess I mean losing someone that vital to you, to your existence, will have an impact
Hmm.
in a lot of ways.
I'm just trying to think what other writers. It depends what mood I'm in, honestly. I mean, there are very few writers who I think bring the whole package, who can do all the things. So if I'm in the mood for just, hey, I know I'm going to get a truly competent, nothing that actively offends me, keeps me moving along, and I'm really interested, I want to read it now, then I would say a John Sanford book. I mean, he writes Lucas Davenport mysteries, and he has a couple of other series, but they're, they're kind of interesting. They're not deep. John Sanford. But then I start reaching. Honestly, there's just there's so many books that I pick up these days, and I'm like, I get so dissatisfied so quickly. I was enjoying the Murderbot books quite a lot. I just finished the last one, but I think sometimes I stop enjoying reading other people's books when I'm getting ready to start writing something new, but I don't know what it is. And I think that might be the process I'm going through right now. So I get sort of impatient with anyone else's words.
Yeah.
At that point, I turn to poetry.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, poetry is different enough, but still gives you the mood kind of thing, right? The fear of being influenced too much, or because if your own words kind of suddenly stand in the way of the words that you're reading, then you're reaching that point. Do something else.
Yeah.
Luckily, I'm not a writer, so I'm good. Not yet.
You think you might be?
You never know. It's like, but here's the thing: is like I made this really stupid that because I get annoyed about people mystifying the process of writing. Like it can't be that hard. I can write a story. It can't be that hard. And then I do the thing I usually do, which is
it's actually not. It's hard to do it really well. So
yeah.
The thing that you have to understand, and I hope you do write something. I'd love to read something you've written because I've really enjoyed your videos. So I think you probably have something to say. So yes, write something and be prepared to write it again, and then have people tell you it's rubbish and think no, they're wrong, and then rewrite it again, etc. And
That's an important thing, though, that you just said. Like you need to be prepared to say no, they're wrong when they tell you that it's not good. Like,
absolutely, psychotic self-belief. That's the most important attribute of a writer. People say, "Oh, yeah, no, you have to persevere, you have to blah." So no, psychotic self-belief. That's what you really need.
And that's the thing. Like when we were talking about like influences, like the things we read, it's like something that happened to me exactly with that whole like writing things. Like I recently reread for reasons that are beyond anything reasonable. I reread The Golden Bough by Fraser, as I say, like for reasons. And then he talks about this. It's a ridiculous book in a lot of ways, but it's full of crazy cool ideas. And he talks about that in parts of Eastern Germany and the Balticum, they have these ideas of like animals that are sort of protectors of the crops, and like a wolf, and they call it the rye wolf because he protects the rye. Then I remember that like years ago, I had read Carlo Ginzburg, The Night Battles about the Benedante, which is a fantastic book, microhistory of the best sort of craziness. And he mentions that this one guy that gets interrogated by the Inquisition from Lithuania, and he talks about that he's a werewolf in like a certain specific date. Werewolves have to go and fight the devil for the crops. So they use like rods of iron and fight the devil and evil witches defend the crops. So you have the rye wolf and you have the werewolf thing.
Oh,
that makes sense. I can do something with that.
Cool idea.
Yeah, exactly. Like, those are like very disparate bits and pieces. I just like collected.
No, this is what. But suddenly you can see.
Yeah.
The legend. You can. Yeah. No, that's great.
I can do something with that. possibly in the future. Like, that's awesome. And when you talk about like how talk about the water treatment plant and stuff, like, yeah, it's you collect a lot of stuff, and
Mhm.
then suddenly some of those things connect, and then you build something from that.
Yes, absolutely. It's like the world is full of little Lego pieces, and they all come trundling along, and they all stick together in various odd ways. And some of them don't work, and then some of them crunch. They come alive.
Yeah, exactly. No, I just love that. That moment for me was just like, wow, I guess this is how writers feel.
Yeah, so if you really want to go there and you ever need any help with it, let me know. I'm happy to chat.
We'll see what comes of all these things. Mostly, I do these things out of spite. I'm like, look, writing something can't be that hard. Writing something good is a different, like,
Mm.
the main thing is to actually sit down.
But you can always fix it. That's the lovely thing about writing.
Yeah, I know. And yeah, as we slowly leave it, getting to the end of this.
Mm.
Yeah, once again, like, thank you for saying the nice thing about the videos. I just made them up. I had no script, whatever. I just start talking, and it meant a lot for me to when you talked about the author and things like, wow, someone I respect appreciates what I've done.
No, I was amazed by that video, Rafe. Are you kidding? It was you bring together the whole tradition in 4
Yeah,
hours. And it's like, man, that's awesome. If I were teaching this shit, I'd be like, yeah, I would just crib all your stuff. I'd be like, and then just little snippets and no, that was great. I was really astonished by it, really, and delighted by it, of course, because you said nice things about me. But I was delighted by the existence of it. It was great.
All I wanted to do was explain to people how to read fantasy, and I started talking about I got read Hayes books and like how you can apply different lenses. And I'm like, mythology is like, oh, I can talk about Arthur, and then it kind of exploded.
Yeah.
I had a first version of that was like 40 minutes long, and I'm like, I missed everything. and that thing's kind of escalated. And now I feel obligated to read every new Arthurian retelling just to be angry at it.
Oh no! Just let it accumulate. Do revisit in 5 years. You just
That might be the safest way. Because there's so many of them. And it never stops.
So did you have you watched the oh, I forget what platform it's on, the new it's a adaptation of Bernard Cornwell's The Winter King.
I have not. I have not, and but I was trying to be diplomatic when I talked about the Winter King. I'm not happy with it. The
Yeah,
War
you should go
Chronicles
there
are
because I
not
have to
good.
say I don't feel very diplomatic today. So
Yeah, yeah.
no,
I'm not
let's
a
just
fan.
say it has some problematic aspects.
It's my point. To make it very blunt, I think there's a level of sexism and anti-intellectualism in Bernard Cornwell's writing that really annoys me. I've read a bunch of his books, and women are always temptresses and sort of evil, except for the one good housewife. Also, intellectual people are either just treacherous or queer coded or both, and that pisses me off.
Mm-hmm. No,
And then
the
he uses
the whole pedophile queer
priest thing.
evil. Yeah, it's like, oh, really? How many layers of
Yeah,
bloodness? I mean, yeah.
and it just pisses me off because he uses enough sort of archaeological details to build that sort of screen of credibility or of authority. It's like, yeah, look, he gets the shield wall right. Like, yeah, if all you have a shield wall, every problem looks like a fucking battle to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he does. It annoys me so much because people don't believe him because he has that semblance of reality of realism. It's like, but it's wrong. It's all wrong, and it's actually harmful. And
It is harmful, and
yeah,
I do have problems with it, but this is part of the whole dominant narrative syndrome, right? I
yeah,
mean, there is a dominant narrative about history, which is that
yeah,
um, women were always nothing. Just as today, there's a dominant narrative about queer people and disabled people and trans people and people of color, and you know, or,
yeah,
and so our part of our jobs as writers is to entertain and then slide the subversion in underneath. I mean, my major job is to get people to read my books. I love writing my books. I love people to
yeah,
enjoy my books. But really, what keeps me going is this notion that my books offer a counter argument
yeah.
to whichever dominant narrative we're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's I think at the core of like my dislike of something like the
Mm.
Winter King or whatever. It's lazy in that it does just go to reinforce already existing stereotypes. You, you're preaching to the choir the entire
Yes,
time,
bridge.
and that choir is already hateful. So don't. And that,
So, does anyone or do you have any more questions? I'm like,
yeah,
I haven't finished my beer, but it won't last that long. So,
I think we're reaching the end here. We should just go and talk to other authors, I guess. But I'm fine with it. I don't have to talk to these people. So
I have to say I'm really enjoying talking to you because I'd never even heard of you like 6 months ago, and now we've exchanged emails, and now we're having an actual conversation. It
yeah,
is so cool.
yeah. And that's sort of the things like I've heard of you before, and then I read Spear for that Arthurian project, and I went, wow, this is awesome. I fell in love, and then I read So Lucky, and it spoke to me, and then I was like, I want to wait to read Hill and Menewood when Menewood comes out, and then I read both. Good, and then it then it took me a lot of time and a lot of people telling me to actually just message you because I was too scared to just contact you. It's like
So then
I
I
would love
contacted
to talk. It took a lot of people yelling at me
you. Yeah.
before I send you that message.
No, so I love to talk to people. I mean,
Yeah,
I am in this way more English than I am American. I'm very happy to say, well, thank you for getting in touch, but now we're done. Bye bye. But people, I'm like, oh, thank you. Yes, let's go do something. Let's woohoo. It's,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, that was quite the ride. Like that was probably like my highlight of this year was like actually going through that whole process. Like, wow, this is awesome. I haven't felt like this for like a long time. With discovering like actually getting to an author. I'm always good at ignoring authors when people tell me you got to read this. My first impulse is always to go say no. If too many people tell me to do something, I always go to the other direction. And then
Mm.
I'm like, okay, this makes sense. I'll read it now. And I'm like, wow, I was wrong. I should have done this earlier.
That happened to me with Patrick O'Brien.
Yeah,
A guy of the editor of an academic journal wrote to me and said, "You should read these books. I think you'd really enjoy them." And I said, "Well, what are they about?" He said, "Well, 19th century naval fiction." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? Are you on crack? Why? No, it's going to be all about boys blowing each other up and eating rats in shipwrecks. And why would I care?" And then I had a conversation with Ursula Le Guin. She said, so I've just read this really good book. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Okay. So if this guy and Ursula Le Guin say this is a good book, it's like, I'm going to have to read this. Okay, I'm going
yeah,
to read this book. I read the first one. I had read the first I read the first 9 in like 2 weeks. I was like, wow. That was astonishing. Yeah.
I pushed Patrick O'Brien to this. I read the Hornblower books at some point because I found a book like probably belonged to my grandmother. I found like a translation of the Hornblower books in a bookshelf, and I was like 14. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And then I was like, I'm not going to go back and read those again. And I think that has tainted my idea of 19th century naval books
Yeah, no,
for a while.
this is
Much better.
so far beyond Hornblower.
I hope so. Um, that's good. But yeah, what you said about being difficult to actually select these are the books. Like, there's so rarely authors where I'm like everything they write is something I'll enjoy. Everything I jump around too much. For me, like the one post I always come back to is Terry Pratchett for all kinds of reasons, but mostly because I love really bad language jokes.
I'm sorry, because you love really bad. I didn't hear that.
Really bad puns and really bad jokes with language, and Terry Pratchett is the master of that.
Mm.
For me,
there are so many books I have loved and have had such an impact on me. I mean,
yeah,
like Lord of the Rings. Wow. I think I probably have read that 30 times. And every single time I read it, I saw something slightly different in it. And his prose is not great.
No.
And wow, the books themselves, the whole way it comes together is astonishing. Particularly this notion of, yeah, heroes do change. You can't always go home again. You have to move on.
Yeah. There's an interesting question by Quick Jen here. One thing that she loves about Hild is that partly she achieves these things because of the spaces that other women create for her. If you can speak to that a bit.
Yes, absolutely. And this comes back to Hild's relationship with her mother also. I mean, Bree Goosewith trains Hild to a certain path the way she trains her sister Harriswith to a certain different path. And she makes the space for that to happen. She's always working behind the scenes to open the corridor wider for them to walk through. And she guides them very carefully. And then Hild herself, when she starts to gain some power, she starts to transfer power to other women. And this is something that pleases me enormously, the notion that we can help each other. We just have to not be selfish. We just have to be human beings and help our people. So yeah, absolutely. Was there more to the question? Have I answered it? I'm sorry. Beer at lunchtime. It's lunchtime for me, so I'm like, ooh, okay.
That's something I really loved. I really appreciate about Menewood, though, is the whole relationship that Hild has with the butcher, whose name escapes me at the moment. Brona. It has the whole like how Brona learns and applies her like experience as a butcher to like human anatomy and medicine in a point, and the ending of their relationship. Because so often when we read fiction, especially in like the fantasy and science fiction area, where people are apparently not really good at writing relationships, it ends in like massive drama or whatever. But that recognition that maybe you've just like moved on and it just doesn't work anymore. And the level of like regret and still appreciation and friendship and love, that was just like one of those very human moments for me where I'm like, wow, it's been a while since I read that anywhere. Because it feels so real.
Well, to me, it feels real because this is what happens a lot.
Yeah.
is that people are like, yeah, I actually don't want to move one more time.
Yeah.
This is me. I love you. I mean, just go do you.
Yeah.
It's yeah. Yeah, it happens all the time. And I think the tragedy of the world is when people fight too hard.
Yeah.
I mean, there are times where fighting as hard as you possibly can is absolutely the right thing to do. And there are times when it's just time to be like, yeah, you're right. It's done. It was great. And I'll come back and we'll chat. We'll drink some mead or some beer, and it'll be awesome. And
Yeah.
but yeah.
I guess that's like the best way to end this conversation. Because it was great. I'm totally happy if you come back for another beer or meet in the future.
And we will at some point. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much.
Anytime.
So thank you very much for actually doing this, and thank you everyone for asking questions, being there, talking amongst each other. That was awesome. It's well, 20 past midnight for me.
I've had a really good time.
Me too. It was absolutely amazing. I loved it. So, well, thank you very, very much, everyone. And I'm going to find the button to actually end this. Here we go. This looks positive.
Yes.
Thank you very much, everyone. And
Thank you.
see you around. It takes like 10 seconds. Here we go. Maybe. Done?
Are we out?
I think so. I think we're done.
Okay.
It's one of those things when browsers are not very fast.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're done.
No, it's been really
Awesome.
really good talking.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
As I said, like I was nervous. Like last time I talked to an author was like 2.5 years ago. I had a conversation with Stephen Erickson about how Joseph Campbell is actually really bad and no one should read. No one should take the monomyth seriously. But that was like 2 years ago. And then I've not talked to. And I don't know. It's just one of those weird things. That level of sort of like anxiety when you talk to people that are supposedly much more important than yourself, which
yeah. But in this crowd, I mean, I think most of the people who are here, you're more important than me because they know you. I mean, and so to me, this is just it's like honestly, to me, this felt like getting to know a new friend in public. And drink a beer on a Sunday. Just like it doesn't suck in any way.
I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Yeah, I did.